Thanks, Lindsay, and thanks everyone for tuning in this evening. Thanks for taking your dinner hour to hang out with us. My name is Natalie Ferraro, and I am the engagement manager for Trailkeepers of Oregon. And for those of you who it's your first time hearing about TKO, we are a all-volunteer trail stewardship organization throughout the state of Oregon. So we build, maintain, and advocate for hiking trails throughout the state. And our official mission is to protect and enhance the Oregon hiking experience through stewardship, advocacy, and education. And so that definitely comes with a lot of different facets. Stewardship is the word that we use when we talk about taking care of hiking trails. Yeah, so that's a term that I think we use a lot in this stewardship nonprofit world, but can be a new one to some folks who haven't been exposed to it before. So when we talk about stewardship, we're talking about taking care of hiking trails, and that can look a lot of different ways. It can look like showing up bright and early in the morning at a trailhead and putting on a hard hat and picking up some tools and going out into the woods and spending the day playing in the dirt. It can look like volunteering as a trail ambassador, which is another part of programming that we have, where folks table at trailheads to interact with trail users and educate them about leave no trace principles, stewardship ethics, how to take care of nature and each other while you're out on the trail. And as well as advocacy efforts. We have a very active board when it comes to advocating for trails across the state, whether that's through funding or environmental protections or things like that. So that's kind of what we do, and we're very excited to be partnering with Women Who Explore. We definitely are looking to build a cohort of women crew leaders for us. Everyone who leads a crew for us, well, 99% of people who lead crews for us are volunteers. We have some staff, but the vast majority of our powerhouse comes from everyday folks just like you, who come out and use their free time to learn the skills and give back to trails that they love. And we're definitely working to build a cohort of women crew leaders to represent out there. And so we're really excited to be partnering with you all and teach you a little bit about what we do and hopefully get you interested in trail stewardship, whether it's in Oregon or, as we saw, there's a lot of folks tuning in from all over the country. Just getting involved with your local trail stewardship group as well, because I guarantee that you have one. A little bit about me. I've been with TKO since 2017. I volunteered right after the Eagle Creek fire that took place in the Columbia River Gorge in 2017. You know, I grew up in this area, and knowing that the trails that I had grown up and learned how to hike on had been so severely impacted by the fire really activated me to get involved. Yeah, and so I started volunteering with TKO and quickly became a volunteer crew leader. And then because I didn't have enough to do in my free time, got suckered into being the volunteer coordinator for several months, because we were a little bitty baby nonprofit. But if you stick around long enough and put in some hard work, they might hire you. So I was part-time for a very long time, and I recently became a full-time staffer, which is very exciting. We're a growing team, a growing nonprofit, and it's a very fun environment to work in. I manage our Trail Ambassador program as one of the chief pieces of programming that I manage, but I'm also a volunteer support mechanism for all those crew leaders that I mentioned before. We have about 80 volunteers who are trained as crew leaders, and I would say anywhere between 30 and 40 of those folks are active on like a weekly or monthly basis across the state doing trail work for us. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me, a little bit about TKO. It's been a really weird year. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention at all, but it's weird out there right now. So getting volunteers out on trails was a challenge that we've been facing all year. And, you know, we figured out the safety protocols we needed to get folks out on trails together, but safely. You know, we've lowered our group sizes, everyone wears masks, we disinfect everything 50 million times over. And we've just kind of been riding that wave of, if we're shut down, okay, then we're not doing much. If restrictions are lifted, then we're able to get out a little bit safely. Currently, right now in Oregon, they just instituted another freeze, so we've slowed down a little bit, but we're looking forward to the next time when we can all get out together. So for those of you who had signed up for the Silver Falls trip, I'm sorry to have to disappoint that we had to postpone, but we're looking to reschedule for December. So for those of you who are in Oregon, we are looking to do a volunteer outing to Silver Falls at some point in December, COVID notwithstanding. So yeah, I guess that's kind of where we're at right now. We're looking ahead to 2021 with fingers crossed and optimism in our hearts, and hoping to continue to get out on as many trails as possible looking forward. So with that, I will pass it off to Susan Chen. Susan Chen has been a volunteer and a staff person for TKO in varying capacities over the years. She's been around with the organization for even longer than I have, and she is our resident trail engineer expert. So she is going to teach you all some of the basics of trail stewardship, and hopefully feel empowered to get out, get in contact with whoever your local trail stewardship group is, put a hard hat on and get some dirt under your fingernails. So take it away, Susan.
All right, thanks, Matt. Yeah, I'm Susan Chen. I've been with Trailkeepers of Oregon volunteering since 2016. When I first moved to Oregon, I had finished a master's degree in ecological landscape design at the Conway School in Western Massachusetts. And I wanted to design trails, and I was like, well, what's a better way to learn how to design them than to go out and volunteer and see how they're built on the ground? Because there's really nothing worse than a designer that doesn't know what the heck's going on the ground. And so I discovered TKO, and I got hooked. I've been a crew leader for 3 years. Like Nat said, I was the Coast Stewardship Coordinator for 18 months, bringing up our North Coast stewardship efforts. And yeah, I'm here today to put up some slides, talk trails, show some tools off, and yeah, let's just jump right into it. I'm gonna share my screen here and we will see how this goes. All right, trail basics. Some caveats first. I move my hands a lot, even though you're probably looking at the slide. So if you see me off to the side, maybe it makes sense, maybe it doesn't. Some of the activities I'm talking about today may be precluded. Like Nat said, the pandemic keeps us locked up in our houses sometimes and not out on the trail. So I might say, hey, you can do this, and maybe you can't right now. A lot of the photos were taken, most of the photos, all the photos were taken before the pandemic, so people aren't wearing masks in the photos. If we were on a trail party working right now and we were as close together as these people are, oftentimes we would be wearing masks for safety. And then lastly, the emphasis of all my technical stuff is going to be on hiking trails because that's TKO's emphasis, but most of it translates over to other kinds of trails like mountain biking trails, off-road trails, things like that. With that said, let's see what we're going to talk about today. First, we're going to talk a little bit about what a trail is. I'm going to explain what the parts of the trail are with a little trail anatomy lesson. We're going to talk tools, what we use to build the trails. And then I'm going to go through the process of how trails get designed and built, and then talk about how they get maintained. And then I'll finish up with talking about like what things that we as individuals can do to make the trail experience better for everyone around us. So what is a trail? I think trails are different things to different people. Some people see it as like a path across the landscape. Some people think of it as like a tunnel through the woods. People use it as a place for a relaxing stroll to kind of de-stress. People find that's their way to get immersed in nature and connect with Mother Earth. And some people see it as a spot to exercise. Why do we have them? Why don't we just do all these things trumping through the woods over logs and rocks and under branches and through the ferns? Well, trails keep us safe. They give us a path that doesn't have a lot of hazards on it. They make it easier to find our way through the woods so we don't get lost. They make it easier so that if we do get lost or hurt or injured, someone can get in and rescue us promptly instead of having to go through jumping over rocks and boulders and logs to get to us and save us. They help minimize our impact in the environment by concentrating our traffic, our foot traffic or bike traffic on a certain area instead of trampling all over the wilderness. If they're properly designed, they minimize erosion and keep sediments from getting into streams and impacting the water life there. They protect cultural resources by keeping people from disturbing indigenous people's historic sites. And they do the same thing for sensitive species by keeping us on trails and out of sensitive habitat. They provide access to get to remote places to find things we never would have thought about unless there was a trail going to it. And they let larger variety of people enjoy trails. So you could be somebody who maybe doesn't have the physical capability to jump over logs and bushwhack, but you could follow a trail to something and be able to enjoy it. And then they're for fun. Sometimes trails have really cool features like steps and swinging bridges. They can provide a pleasant atmosphere depending on the environment they're going through, or they can provide a fun challenge for us as people who like to recreate in the outdoors. So yeah, those are all great thoughts, but like, what is a trail technically? Like, I know you guys want the on the ground nitty gritty. So here we go. Trail anatomy. First of all, we're going to be talking about sustainable trails. And those are trails that are durable and low maintenance. They provide safe access to recreation while protecting the landscape and its inhabitants. So these are trails that don't have to be like rebuilt every year. And they have a nice sturdy surface for people to walk on and not trip. And they protect the environment through which they go. So we'll start with the basics, the part you walk on. We call that the tread. The width of the tread varies depending on the type and the number of users. For a regular old hiking trail for a few people at a time, maybe it's 3 feet wide. If you've got to have wheelchairs passing each other on it, maybe it's 6 or 8 feet wide. It really just depends on the type of people using the trail, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. We want the trail to be made of soil or rock, not organic material like leaves and sticks that are going to degrade over time, hold water, get mushy and mucky. We want something that's going to compact and form a nice durable surface. And then we also make sure the tread is sloped to the outside a little bit to let water get off the trail. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in just a couple minutes. The uphill side of the trail, we call the back slope. We like that to be at a 45-degree angle or less so that we minimize erosion of stuff that the hillside so it doesn't fall on the trail and fill it up and make it narrower when we've already done so much work to make a nice wide sturdy surface. And we want it to be free of hazards. We don't want it to have loose rocks that are going to fall on people. We don't want branches sticking out into people's faces or anything like that. The downhill side of the trail we call the down slope. We like to have a defined edge at the edge of the tread for that down slope so people know that that's not where they should be walking. They should be walking on the nice flat section. We want that to be free of hazards as well. And we want it to be clear of obstructions so that water that flows across the tread off the trail isn't going to get trapped. The place where the back slope meets the tread, we call the hinge. I don't think there's a particular reason we have to call it something, but people refer to it a lot when we're doing maintenance. So we call it the hinge. It's usually fairly well defined, but it doesn't have to be a sharp edge, and we don't want it to be a ditch because we don't want water coming down the hillside to get trapped there on the trail. The tunnel through the woods, like I mentioned in that first slide, we call the corridor. It's the area above and to the sides of the trail that we want clear of vegetation. We want people to be able to walk through the trail not getting hit in the face with stuff. We don't want wet ferns and grasses up to your waist, getting your pants soaking wet when you're walking down the trail. And we want to ensure that things are visible. So say you're on a hiking trail that also allows mountain bikes, you can see each other ahead of time and avoid collisions and not surprise each other. When on a computer, you want the corridor to be free of text intruding into it and blocking your face. And then on the trail, the height and width of that corridor will depend on the users. So for hikers, like person-sized hikers, usually 6 feet wide, which if you're 6 feet tall like me is as wide as your arms are. So you shouldn't be able to reach out and touch anything. And 8 feet high, so you're not hitting your head. But if it's somebody like an equestrian who's riding on horseback, we're going to clear that corridor to be a lot taller, so people who are up higher aren't hitting their head on stuff. So you can't talk about technical stuff for trails too much without having to do a little bit of math and talk about slope. So when we talk about slope, usually we're talking about a percent slope, which is the amount that you go up or down divided by the amount you go side to side or front to back. So we call that the rise over the run. And so the rise is the vertical bit, the run is the horizontal bit. And you can think about the run being like how far you're walking along the trail, and the rise being what elevation gain you had. That's one way of thinking about it. An example, just to do the math, if your elevation changes by 5 feet as you're walking 50 feet along a trail, you take that 5 feet as your rise, divide it by the 50 feet that you walked horizontally, which is your run, and you get 0.1. And if you multiply that by 100, that's a slope of 10%. And that's a relatively gentle, typical slope for a hiking trail. When we think about the slope along the trail, the way you're walking, we call it the grade. And when we talk about the slope across the trail, we call it the cross slope. And let's talk about a little bit about what those numbers should be. So the outslope of the trail is usually about 5 or 10% on a natural surface trail. And by that, I mean a trail that's either like dirt or gravel. And that's to allow water to flow off the trail without making it feel like you're on an uneven surface. On paved trails, it can be a lot less because the pavement lets water flow more easily. Usually the side slope or outslope on those is only 2%. And what we want is this water to come down the hillside, go across the trail, and then off down the downslope. As far as the grade goes, usually it varies between 0 and 20% for a hiking trail, sometimes a little steeper, but not for long distances ideally. For longer sections, 5 to 10%, maybe 0 to 10% is a nice, it makes it accessible for a lot of people to be able to use it. For short sections, you can go 15 to 20%, but 20% starts to feel steep and tiring. And if you're out for an adventure or a challenge, that's great. But when you're trying to make it accessible to a lot of people, if that's one of your considerations, that can be a little bit challenging for folks. Long runs of a 15% grade can lead to increases in erosion. So it's good to avoid that. And I'll demonstrate here with a little bit of animation here. If this is our water flowing across the trail with a gentle grade, as we increase the grade, the water tends to flow along the trail more because that becomes steeper. And as it becomes steeper and steeper, the water will eventually just flow entirely on the trail. And once you have water flowing along like this trail, it picks up speed, which gives it more power to erode and move material, and it's going to damage the trail surface. So we want to avoid long stretches of trail with a steep slope. One way we deal with that is if we're designing a new trail, we have what we call grade reversals, where we change the slope a little bit, just adding gentle undulations to the trail. And that allows us to take any water that would be on the trail between any high points on those undulations and have it exit at the low point so the water doesn't flow along the trail for a long time. Excuse me. And so here you can see these arrows, instead of going the whole length of the trail and down off, it takes it into short bits and removes the water from the trail. If that's not an option, or if it's an old trail that was not designed sustainably, you can dig a drain dip across the trail. And that's a wide excavated low area on the tread that can catch water uphill from it and allow it to get off the trail. We don't want it to be a narrow ditch across the trail because that's a tripping hazard. This is something we want to be a gentle hump and dip so that you can walk through it with minimal effort, but it allows water to get off the trail like this. And that outslope in there is going to be 10 or 15% to get that water a little extra speed as it gets off the trail so it can wash debris out and keep that drain clean. It's not an ideal solution, but it works fairly well if the trail is already designed in place and is having drainage problems. You might have noticed that the trails were built on hillsides, and there's a reason for that. If you go straight up a hillside, there's no way to tilt the trail to the side to get water off of it. And so the water will always run directly down the trail. And in the picture here, you can see how that starts to erode the path and cut a deep gully as the water rushes down the trail. Kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, we try not to build trails in flat, low areas because those get really muddy. And as you probably have experienced, once you have a muddy area on the trail, you end up with a wide, muddy area on the trail because everybody wants to walk around the mud and not get their feet wet. So we try and build trails up on hillsides so that we have a way to get water off of them and not end up with either of those two problems. Okay, that's the end of trail anatomy for right now. Let's talk about trail design a little bit. So when we're talking about design, we got to think about who's using the trails. So we got all sorts of people, types of users. We've got walkers, we've got hikers, we've got equestrians, we may have off-road vehicles, we might have bikers, wheelchair users, skateboarders or roller skaters, and animals. And not just the horses or our pet dogs, but wild animals use our trails too. And if you've ever seen the results of a herd of elk crossing a trail during the wet season, you know that they definitely can have an impact, and it's a good thing to think about when you're planning. In addition to all those types of uses, the people that use the trail come from all different types. We've got children using trails versus adults, so we might want to think about like shorter trails or easier trails for the kids to handle. We have inactive people versus active people, so maybe some less steep trail for people who are a little bit more sedentary, and steeper, longer, higher trails for people who are more active. We've got people, individuals versus groups. So if you've got a trail you're designing, are we going to have a few people once in a while hiking it in the wilderness, or are we getting a busload of kids dropped off and they're all charging down the trail from the parking lot? People who are experienced versus inexperienced. Maybe we keep our trail navigation simple. We don't go near dangerous cliff edges, things like that. People who are disabled versus not disabled, we might have wheelchair accessible paths or other accommodations. And there are people who are neurodivergent versus people who are neurotypical. Maybe we need extra signs for navigation or some railings to make people feel secure in the outdoors. We just come in so many different types and shapes and sizes and mentalities. There's a lot to think about when we design trails for a variety of users. In addition to who's going to be using the trail, we got to think about where these trails are going to go and how the locations are going to impact our trail design. So the trails go up mountains, they go across deserts, they go over creeks, they go around lakes, and they go through wetlands. And all of these kind of situations will lend constraints to our design. If you're going across a barren desert, maybe you need signs or other markers to help with navigation. If you're putting a trail across a creek, maybe you need stepping stones or a bridge. If you're near a lake, maybe you need to keep the trail further away from the lake so people don't shortcut down to it everywhere, or design specific access points so they can make it get to the lake in a sustainable way. If you're going through a wetland, maybe you have to put your trail on a boardwalk so you can get through the wet areas without causing damage. So those are all other things that need to be thought of in the trail design process. In addition, we have different kinds of trails. We have out and back trails where we walk to the end and back on the same trail. We have loops, which just go in a loop. We've got networks of trails, which might be a good option if we've got a lot of different users, where you can kind of design your own length of hike based on the different trails you want to take. Those might require more signs though, because there are intersections of different trails. Excuse me. And then there are trails that you don't come back from. I mean, not don't come back from, but you don't walk back to the same point. Like the Pacific Crest Trail on the map over there is a through hike trail. So we've got considerations about the type of trail we want to make for the type of people we want to use it and the type of area it's going to go through. So once we decide which trails get made, like who's going to make these trails? Well, there are a lot of different people that can make trails. We've got public land managers who range from the federal forest managers, like the Forest Service. We've got state parks, and we've got regional land managers like our Portland Metro in the Portland area. We've got private land managers like land trusts, land conservancies. They often will build trails on their land to allow people to access the natural resources and interpretation. We have professional trail builders who land managers often hire to build trails for them. Some of them are individual design build outfits. Some of them are youth groups like the Northwest Youth Corps or Oregon Youth Conservation Corps. And then there are volunteers like Trailkeepers of Oregon, for instance. Or in the Pacific Northwest, some of our other partners like the Washington Trails Association, the Northwest Trail Alliance, who focuses on mountain bike trails, the Pacific Crest Trail Association, who takes care of the Pacific Crest Trail, and the Backcountry Horsemen, who focus on wilderness trails that are open to horses. So all these people together are people who can and do build trails. So how do we get this thing made? Well, first, the route gets designed, both conceptually and on the ground. So someone comes up with an idea of where they want a trail to go, and then they get out a contour map, and then they go out on the ground and try and figure out where they could put a trail, given the design constraints they've got, like the maximum slope you can have on the trail, or which places you want the trail to go. Then they'll do what they call flag the route by putting flag tape, which is plastic tape, in the trees so people can follow the route through the woods even though they haven't built a trail yet, and then get approvals from the land managers, which I'll talk about just a little bit here. And then after that, the trail gets built, and then after that, the trail is maintained ongoing. And that's something people forget about, is the maintenance part. It's really important. Trails don't just stay open just because people walk on them and trample on them. There's a lot of work that goes into keeping trails open, and I'll get into that a lot very soon. So design considerations, the why. So where is this trail going? Why do we want it? Do we have a waterfall we want to get to? Do we want to get to the top of a ridge? If we want to get to both, then the trail is going to go to one of those and then the other one. And so that will determine kind of what the route is. Why are we building a trail in the first place? The who, that's going to determine a lot of the factors. The steepness, like again, what talked about all the different types of people that are going to use the trail. A very steep trail is going to limit the number of people that can use it. So we're going to keep that in mind. The width of the trail, again, number of people, types of vehicles, the length of the trail, navigation aids, the need for those, again, dependent on who's going to be using the trail. The surface type, if we're going to have a dirt trail, a gravel trail, a paved trail, might depend on whether we're having, skateboards and wheelchairs on it, or if it's just going to be hikers and equestrians. And then where trail turns are, like I said, that viewing line to make sure that you're safe if people are able to move fast on the trail and need to be able to see each other before encountering each other. And then the where, if we're in the mountains or a wet area, managing runoff and streams, how steep is the trail? Maybe it has to be longer to get up the top of that mountain because you can't just go straight up it. Any structures you might need to build to get across streams or go up steep slopes. Again, navigation aids, if you're in a very dense forest that grows closed quickly, or if you're in the desert, you might need more signs. And then safety features, if you're going along cliffs, you might need railings or handholds or something like that. So we use flagging tape to flag the trail. It's just brightly colored strips of plastic that you tie around tree branches. It's kind of the first thing that we do once the route has been determined. And when you're out there flagging the trail, you're not just putting those flags in the trees exactly where you had the line on your map. You're also adjusting the route to avoid hazards, like maybe there's a giant tree stump or there's a giant rock that you're not going to be able to move. And you're going to have to adjust your route to avoid those type of things. At the same time, you're going to be wanting to check your slope frequently, because if you adjust your trail a little bit, you're going to have to check and make sure you're not changing the slope too much to become too steep in a spot that it won't be possible for people to navigate properly, or if you're staying too level for too long and then you're going to end up having to be really steep at the end. So checking that slope up and while flagging the route is one of the prime concerns. And then using enough flags. This is a photo from when I was trying to follow a flag line someone had left. And they had flagged it in the fall when the leaves were off the trees. And then I came back in the spring and tried to follow it through all of the new growth. And there is a little bit of orange in the middle there, and it was really hard to find. So if you're ever out doing this, please use enough flags. It's really just saves us so much trouble for the people who are coming out to build it. After the trail is flagged, then the land managers can get their resource officers out there to check and make sure that the trail isn't going to disturb any resources. So one of those things is cultural resources. This picture shows a trail that actually goes through an area with a bunch of bits of broken shell from a shell midden from previous encampments of indigenous people. And that's something we don't want to disturb when we're building a new trail. So we want to make sure that gets checked. Natural resources are also important. The big round leaf in the middle, I believe, is a bristly stem checker mallow, which is an endangered species on the coast of Oregon. And if it's present, it'd be good to route the trail either around it or maybe near a patch of it so people can appreciate it and gain some more understanding of it. But being aware of where it's at is important in choosing a route of the trail and getting it approved. And then usually the land managers require a build plan and a maintenance plan before construction starts. So they know who's building the trail, what the schedule is, and then who's going to be responsible for maintaining it after it's built. Okay, so all our approvals are done. We got a plan. We got our maintenance plan. We need tools. So let's talk about tools. So I'm going to take this opportunity to step back from screen sharing and try and just do this live so we're not just staring at a slideshow. And hopefully y'all can see me. And I'm going to go through some trail tools. All right, so take me just a second here so I can keep things in order. Okay, so the first thing I need to do before I pick up a tool is put on gloves, because safety is the most important thing. So on gloves and tools. Okay, so this is a rock bar. It is a very heavy prying tool that we use primarily when we're moving big rocks or big logs. If we're building retaining walls or features like that, we often, the rock bar tends to be somewhat indispensable. It's very heavy, so when people carry it in, we let them carry it on their shoulder. But if you're following somebody who's carrying the rock bar, leave some distance, because if they stop suddenly, you don't want a rock bar in the face. The next trail tool I've got is a Picmatic. It's got a pick on one side and an adze on the other. This is a tool we use for prying also. It's also used for digging in rocky soil. It's got a very sturdy handle on it, so it can be used to pry things and put a lot of force on it. And it's good to use for scooping stuff as well, but it doesn't move that much material at once because the end is narrow. When we carry our tools, we usually put the business end facing down and away from us, but this has two business ends, and we usually point the pick away from us, because if you fall on the pick, sucking chest wound. You fall on this, big bruise. So we carry this at our side with that pointed down. Let's see, the next two tools I have are what we call grubbing tools. And they're what we use for primary digging. This one here is called a Grub Hoe. This one here is called a green grubber. They're both very similar. They're basically like a really, really sturdy garden hoe with a shorter handle. And we use these for doing most of the digging. Like if we're establishing that tread and shaping it, this is the tool we're going to use for that. This one was invented by a guy named Green, and he made the original blades out of old plow discs, which I think is kind of neat. Okay. Next, a shovel. Nothing spectacular there, but we rarely use it for digging. We usually use it for scooping and for scraping. So you can get down on your hands and knees or down, crouch down, and you can use this to scrape and do really precision shaping of the trail. The one thing we really don't use it for is prying, because this is weak and shovels are probably the tool people break the most besides loppers, which I'll show you in just a second. Okay, let's see. Okay. This is called a McLeod. It was invented by Malcolm McLeod in 1905. It's got a rake on one side and kind of a wide hoe on the other side. This one is a frequently used tool in wilderness firefighting, and it's really great for removing organic material and dust from the trail, which is an important part of building the trail if we're going to make that tread surface free of that material. We always carry it with the tines facing down because, again, we don't want sucking chest wounds if we fall on it when we're carrying it. This is a Pulaski. One of the volunteers I worked with asked if it was called a murderer. It looks very dangerous and very threatening. It was invented by Ed Pulaski in 1911. It has an axe on one side and an adze on the other side. We often use this on trail parties to deal with roots in the trail, where we'll use the adze to dig the soil and rocks away from the root, and then we'll use the axe side to chop the root. When we carry it with the axe side facing down because that we keep sharper than the adze side. This and the McLeod are frequently used in wilderness firefighting. So you'll see these in the backcountry when people are fighting wildfires as well, and they've been adopted for trail building. These are loppers. You may be familiar with these. They're for cutting small branches. We have a rule of thumb, 2 rules of thumb with loppers. Don't cut anything bigger than your thumb, and don't cut off your thumb. Even when you have the long handles, they're not meant for extra leverage necessarily. They're more for extra reach. So if you're cutting something with loppers and you're like, oh, it's time to switch to a saw and use that. It'll be a lot safer and you won't break the loppers. This is the pruning saw we use for sawing small branches. We'll talk about where to cut those branches in a little while. It cuts on the pull stroke and it's very sharp. So whenever we're finished using it, we put it back in the sheath immediately and try not to cut ourselves. It's probably the most dangerous tool that we have on a trail party. The last tool I have is a crosscut saw. This is my 4-foot long crosscut saw. Get the teeth up close there. You can see them. She's named Buffy, and we use her on logouts for cutting larger trees off the trail. If we have time at the end, I can go into more detail on the teeth arrangement and some stuff like that if people are interested. But for right now, we'll just say that they're very dangerous. You always want to have gloves on when you're using them. We keep a sheath on this at all times. And we have to have a certified sawyer on site to use these on a trail party because of the level of danger, not just from the saw, but from when you cut through a big log, when you finally cut through it. If you're not careful, it can move and hurt somebody. So we have to have certified sawyers to use the big saws like this. Okay. Back to the slides. Let's see here. So share screen. Are you guys seeing it when I show the screen? It was giving me a little trouble here. Let me try that again.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. All right, cool. I'm not going to spend any time on these slides, but I do have them in here in case you learn better by reading. When this video is shared later, you can refer to them, but they have short descriptions of all the tools that I just talked about and showed. Oh, I forgot the rock web. So the rock web is a big web made out of nylon straps that you can get 5 or 6 people around to carry rocks that weigh hundreds of pounds or more. And that's really important if you're building structures. You need to use large stones that aren't going to move. And so moving those around with the rock web is it's kind of fun, but it requires a lot of coordination and teamwork. Okay, done with tools. Got them. We've got our route flagged. Let's build a trail. So the first thing we do when we build the trail is we clear that corridor of brush. We usually clear it 8 or 10 feet wide, which is a little bit wider than we would normally just for the tread. But we want to make sure we can see all the obstacles that may be in the way, like whether there's a long route coming from somewhere, if there's big rocks, things like that. And once we've cleared that, during that time, we'll also make final alignments to the trail if we need to avoid newfound obstacles that we've uncovered by clearing all the brush. And this team has just done that on a trail in just south of Neocony Mountain, a new portion of the Oregon Coast Trail. After that, we remove the dust. So that's that organic material on the forest floor that we don't want to be part of the tread. And so we want to remove that from the trail, from the tread, from the backslope and the downslope so water can get across the trail. And we don't want to pile it up at the edge. We need to make sure we get it away from the trail. We don't want to smother vegetation with a big pile. We don't want a big pile at the edge of the trail to trap water. So we tend to disperse it. And so Jerry here is putting it into a bucket so she can hike it down the hill and spread it out somewhere else away from the trail. And after the dust is removed, we get down to the hard work of shaping the trail tread. We make that tread, we make that backslope. The backslope here by her foot, and then the tread across, and then the downslope by the yellow-handled tool that Alina's holding. You define the hinge, and if there's extra soil that's not organic material, it can be used to fill in holes or other purposes to shape that tread properly, as long as it gets compacted well. And that's it. That's what you build a trail. But now what? Now it's maintenance time. But it's not that bad. Okay, so why do we have to maintain trails? Well, we got to keep them safe. So if there's hazards that pop up, fall on the trail, grow into the trail, we want to make sure those get cleared off so that the trail continues to be a safe place. Or if the trail starts to collapse for some reason, we don't want people falling off the trail. So we want to make sure that we check for those things and fix them. Having the trail well maintained helps people stay on the trail. If that corridor is clear, then people can walk on the trail and not have bushes in their face. If they start to get bushes in their face, they're going to start to walk off the side of the trail. And that's going to start trampling vegetation and causing other issues. So it helps people stay on the trail if we maintain it properly. It makes it stay accessible to more people. Again, if the trail is overgrown or uneven or has hazards, it's going to limit the number of people, the types of people that can use it. So we want to make sure we can keep it accessible to all the people it was originally intended for. We want to provide a high quality hiking experience. People are hiking these trails probably not to have to jump over big logs and walk through mud that they don't have to walk through. We want them to be able to use the trail to get where they're going and enjoy what they came for. And then lastly, we want to make sure we're minimizing that impact to natural resources. If the trail is starting to collapse or things like that, we're causing excess erosion. We're putting excess materials that could end up in streams, increasing turbidity and decreasing the habitat quality. So those are all reasons we maintain trails. So let's look at some examples of some trails that need maintenance and what we might do to fix them. Excuse me, I'm gonna take a sip of water here. Okay. So this trail, I mean, the tread looks fine, but if we look, our corridor is being impinged on by some lovely purple blooming salmonberry bushes, which are very common here in Oregon, and they grow fast and they tend to come out into the trail very quickly. So what do we do about this sort of thing? Well, we call removing this vegetation brushing, and we usually do it with saws and loppers. And the important thing to do is to cut it far back from the trail, and we'll cut things at branch junctions, at the trunk, or at the ground. We don't want to leave things sticking up that people could get poked in the eye. We don't want to leave things sticking up out of the ground that people could fall on. So if you look at the stick figure thing, this shrub that's engulfing her arm, we would cut that there at that branch junction. And the vine that's grabbing her leg, we would cut that off at the ground. And then the tree, we would cut that branch that's hitting her in the face at the trunk. And then after we've brushed out and cleared all the vegetation so the corridor is clear, we want to remove those trimmings from the trail. And either if we can throw them far back in the woods, that's great. If we can't throw it because there's other vegetation in the way, we'll often drag it back into the woods and hide the pile there, because we don't want an unsightly pile of like dead branches with dead leaves on it, spoiling the view for everybody who's walking by. And you can see an example here of some massively overgrowing shrubs on a trail, and it looks like Rowan there is attacking them with her pruning saw. Okay, so here's another piece of trail that needs some work. It looks kind of narrow. There's a lot of plants growing in. It looks like maybe water can't get off of it. The tread should probably be right here, and it's not. So what's going on here? Maybe we have a word for that, or two. Of course we do. We call it fluff and berm. Fluff is the material that accumulates at the hinge of the trail, and that's right in here, if you can see my cursor. And then berm is material that builds up at the edge of the trail. So fluff fills in the trail from the side. Plants start growing in it, so that starts to impinge in the corridor. It narrows the tread, and it pushes people out towards the outer edge of the trail. Berm makes it look like something that's safe to walk on when it isn't necessarily, and it also traps water on the trail, which you can see at our stick figure's feet, which is probably why she's got a grumbly face instead of a happy face right now. And so the idea for fixing that is just removing that extra material. And you can see these ladies here have removed it in the foreground. They've removed the fluff so that you can see where the hinge is now. And then they've removed the berm so that that downslope is clear of obstruction. If you're removing soil and not just organic material, you can use that extra soil to fill in holes or restore the outslope. And if you're getting a lot of slough all the time, it's good to check the steepness of that back slope. We talked earlier about how we want it to be 45 degrees or less to keep that material from falling. If it's becoming a repeating problem, it might be something to tackle and reduce that slope further so you don't have slough every year to clear out. Okay, oof, that looks gnarly. What happened to this trail? Looks like the tread is not flat at all anymore. It looks like water is getting trapped on it. If we look here, we can see our back slope and our down slope are fine, but boy, that tread is severely cut into. And it looks like we got a lot of water flowing on it. So we call that cupped tread, named after the kind of curvy cup shape. And it's an indication that water's not getting off the trail properly, and it's started to cause damage and erode the center of the tread. And so the solution to that is to take that outside edge berm you have now, use that soil to fill the center of the tread and smooth it out to reshape it to what it was supposed to be like. And you can see here in this photo that John and Kristen have done that. There used to be a piece of a cupped piece of tread right in front of them. They took soil from the downhill side, filled it in, and made a nice sturdy surface to walk on. And they've got the back slope, the tread, and that down slope all dialed in nicely. If cupping is a continuing problem, it might be worth considering adding drain dips to get that water off the trail more frequently once you've made the initial repair so it doesn't happen again. Okay, last one. Well, this is a pretty obvious one. Our tread and back slope and stuff is in great shape, but we've got a giant log in the middle of our corridor. And so how do we get rid of that safely? We start out by swamping. And what we call swamping is clearing all the branches and the debris from the area we're going to be cutting so that it's a safe workspace. We don't want to be getting caught up on things when we're using the saws. And we want to make sure that we've cleared an escape route from where we're going to be cutting, because as we cut, once we get close to the log being cut all the way through, when it's finished, we call it releasing. If there's energy in it, tension or compression or anything like that, the log could jolt suddenly, and we want to be able to have a person be able to get away from that quickly. After the area is safe, we plan where we want to make the cut and figure out where we want the log to go once it is cut. Usually logs are round, and so you can plan your cut to have the log land in a certain place and then roll it off the trail to get it out of the way. Then when we're using crosscut saws, we have to remove bark first before we make the cut, because bark traps grit, and that's really abrasive, and it will dull the teeth on these vintage saws really quickly, and it's very time consuming and or expensive to sharpen them. So we peel the bark off the log where we make the cut. Then we cut the log and we remove it from the trail. And if we do our job right, we will cut it so that the corridor is clear, and we've cut a big enough section out so that people aren't going to have to squeeze through. This is from a log that we cut just a few weeks ago, just south of Neoconi Mountain on the Oregon coast. Sometimes the log is not round and it won't roll, and we have to use special tools to get it out of the way. And in this case, this log was a Y shape. The tree had grown in a Y formation, and the Y was right on the trail. And so we use what we call rigging, which is ropes and pulleys and hand winches to give ourselves some extra mechanical advantage to move material. And so I'm going to start this clip. This is a time lapse of when we moved this. This log section weighed about 3,000 pounds. And so we hooked up, we tried a couple of different ways of pulling on it. And eventually we decided to double up and use a pulley to get an extra mechanical advantage to pull it over. And then we used levers to help push it up and over, and we got it down on the trail. And now if you can see here, we had it roll onto these logs here as rails so that we wouldn't be having to drag it along the ground and there'd be less friction. And then we proceeded to hook up the winch and the pulley again and pull the log off to the side of the trail. That was a lot of fun. I got to lead that because I was the person most experienced in rigging. And gosh, we were all pretty thrilled at the end of the day when we finished that. After the log is removed from the trail, sometimes the tread is damaged from the tree that fell on it, and that should be restored. Okay, wow, that's a lot of work just to keep the trails clear. Could there be anything more? Oh yeah. Drainages. Sometimes we can't make trails drain just by having the outslope and have the downslope clear. And we have to install things like culverts. And sometimes those get clogged. So in this trail party, Darren was helping out. We were taking an old wooden box culvert, taking it out, clearing all the debris out of it, and then resetting it at a proper angle so it would drain properly. This is after a fire hit the Columbia Gorge area. It burned away all the ferns and mosses that glue the rocks together. And when the rocks aren't glued together, then they fall down the hillside onto your trail. And so we had numerous crews having to go out to a variety of places and clear all the rocks off the trail. Fortunately, these areas were closed while we were working in them. We had special permission from the land managers to go in and do this work. So we didn't have to worry about people downhill from us and dropping rocks on them. But that is a consideration when you're doing trail work. If their trail goes below you again, keeping an eye out for dropping debris on people because they don't like it and it's not nice. Installing gabions. If the trail's falling up a hillside, these are a great trail structure. They're basically a big wire mesh cage that you fill with rocks, and it acts like a giant brick. And they are used to stabilize trail where it's falling down the hillside in steep areas or other types of situations like that. And you basically start out by digging a big trench and posing in it for a photo. And then you put the cage in there and fill it with rocks. And then you cover it up and put the trail on top of it. That's a lot of fun. There's a lot more details than just that. But again, we've got an hour, so I'm not going to go into super detail. If you want to know more, put a question in the chat. I'll talk more later about it. I'm happy to. Turnpikes. This is when you take either rocks or logs and put them along the edges of the trail and then fill it with material in between to raise the tread up above wet areas. In this case, we used logs and filled it with gravel. And to let water get across the trail, we left a little gap here. Sometimes instead people will put a culvert under the trail, but it is important to let the water get across somehow aside from trying to go through the turnpike. But that's a good way to make a trail through a wet area a lot more easy to navigate and more sustainable, require less maintenance. Building bridges is really cool. This is from a bridge building class I was in. It's a lot more like carpentry than the rest of the trail work, but the feeling at the end of the day when you walk on a bridge that you just built is pretty awesome. So if you have an opportunity to get out and build a bridge, super recommend it. This is the last type of trail maintenance I'm going to talk about today. Decommissioning trails. This is one of my favorite things. We often have people that will take shortcuts across switchbacks, or they'll climb directly up a hillside and to try and get around some slow hikers, and then the person after them does it, and the person after them does it. And soon you've got this ugly scar that's eroding horribly, and people shouldn't be using it. And so decommissioning and restoration is the process by which we reclaim that to its natural state, and at the same time, address the root cause of why people were going up there in the first place. So if it was a problem with navigating the original trail, some blockage on the original trail, we want to make sure we address that in addition to taking away the user trail and restoring it to its natural state. And this is a before and after of the same site during a trail restoration class we did a few years ago in the gorge. Okay, time to stretch after all that hard work. So what can we do? How do we get involved in this stuff? Well, you can join a trail party. Trailkeepers of Oregon runs trail parties. Our priorities for our trail parties are safety first, then having fun, and then getting work done. In terms of safety, we always start off with a safety talk, talking about tool safety and personal safety. So everybody knows exactly what they need to know to avoid injury. We talk about COVID at the beginning of the day if we're having trail parties during COVID times. We have an inclusivity statement that talks about all the different types of people that we have on trail parties and how we have to be respectful of each other. And we have very experienced crew leaders leading these crews to help keep people safe. Our trail party is a lot of fun, even when it's wet and muddy outside. At least people like Natalie have fun. It's really fun to learn new things. We almost always are out there laughing, especially if it's a women's work party. I gotta say, it's just a different vibe and it's super fun. It's a good way to get exercise if you're looking for a different way to exercise. And really, there's no experience necessary. Our crew leaders will teach you everything you need to know for most of our trail parties, and you can just learn a lot so fast. And you might meet new and interesting people. This was a group of people I met when I was about to give a safety talk, and they are the League of Extraordinary Flukes. And I was so thrilled I got to meet them. So you just never know who you're gonna meet on a trail party, whether it's with TKO or any other organization near you. And then the last thing we do is we get work done. And, you know, it feels really good to contribute to our local trails. There's that feeling of achievement from having created something or repaired something. And then just knowing that other hikers are going to appreciate your work just feels good. And a lot of times if we're working on trails that are open, people walk by and say thank you to us. I actually had a group serenade us with hi ho as we walked by with all our tools. It's really kind of cool to get out there and do maintenance when there are other people around. So I highly encourage you, if you have the ability to do it, to try it out. Some other things you can do, you can scout trails. That means going on a hike and observing the trail and looking for issues. Kind of like the ones that I just took you through, like fluff and berm on the trail, or brushing, or logs down. Being able to make it useful, taking a photo with something in it for scale so that land manager or whoever you report it to has an idea of how big things are, and then noting the name of the trail and the GPS. If you can get that information in with your report, it really increases the odds that the issue will get addressed. A lot of land managers get complaints saying, oh, I was on this trail and a ways in, it was muddy. That doesn't really help very much. But if you can give details and a photo and a location, then they can really get after it and be able to address it. Excuse me. You can report it to the land manager, the ranger, or if you're in Oregon, you can report it to Trailkeepers of Oregon via our Trail Eyes report form on our website. And there are other trail organizations that do a similar thing where you can report to them, and they'll get their volunteers out there to assess it and lead a trail party to fix it. You can make a trip report. It doesn't have to be all about fixing trails. I mean, if you share a trail report on one of the various websites out there, sharing your experience with the recent trail conditions, your photos, these things help other people decide whether they should go on a trail or pick a trail they want to go on. And that's enhancing the hiking experience for other people. So making those trip reports after you get back, it's a lot of fun. And, you know, boost your ego, getting your photos out on the web, and it does a service for the community. Trailkeepers of Oregon helps maintain the Oregon Hikers Forum. That's one place in Oregon you can go and talk about trails in Oregon. You can become a trailhead ambassador. We have a program with a number of our partner groups where Natalie talked about at the beginning, where you teach people about leave no trace, about safety, trail ethics and etiquette. The training for our March 2021, our 2021 season is in March, so keep an eye out for that. And it's just a nice way to like make sure other hikers are going to have a great day. And I think that's super beneficial. So if you know, maybe you aren't able to do trail work, but you can contribute in so many other ways. If you're really interested in trail work, you can learn more at Trailkeepers University. It's on our website, and we do classes and we do weekend trainings. You can learn everything from the basics to very advanced structure building skills. And we even have a saw certification program, so you can learn how to use and lead crews using those big crosscut saws. And we also have online training. A lot of organizations have their training curriculum online as well. We recently added videos that have some really cool animations on them, including particularly in our Trail Eyes lab, which is on our website. They have nice titles like Mind the Mud and Log a Log, which I think that one's my favorite. Anyway, those are really cool things to check out and learn more online when you can't be out on the trail. Or you could join an organization, whether it's Trailkeepers of Oregon or another trail organization, joining another Friends of organization for a local park or open space in your neighborhood. All sorts of ways you can get involved locally in improving people's experience in the outdoors, whether it be in trails, parks, or whatnot else. Lastly, I think just going out and being a good example is just something we can all do every day. Whether it's just going out and simply staying on the trail and not taking those shortcuts, obeying park rules when you're out on the trails, practicing leave no trace in your own trail activities, being prepared so that you have the capability to take care of yourself and maybe offer help to someone else who might need it on the trail, as well as not ending up being someone who needs to call on help from somebody else. Having a plan B, I think this is one that doesn't get talked about often enough. Considering that if the weather is really wet and the trail is muddy, choosing another trail so that you're not going to damage that trail when it's inclement weather and it's really susceptible to damage. And if the trailhead parking lot's full, maybe choosing another place to park instead of parking illegally on the roadside and making a crowded mess of things at the parking lot. Those are things that really can make the hiking experience better for you and for everybody else. And then just lastly, being kind. You know, there's all sorts of people from all sorts of walks of life with all sorts of levels of trail experience, and they're out there for different reasons. and just taking the time to just assume the best of everybody in our interactions, I think is the last and easiest way to make trail hiking a better experience for everybody. That's all I got. Stop sharing my screen.
I'm muted. I was muted. Thanks so much, you guys. This was super awesome and informative. Natalie, do you have anything else you want to add?
Let me see. I guess thank you everyone for tuning in. I would add that if you are in Oregon and you like this kind of stuff and you're a hiking aficionado, TKO is having another webinar on Sunday evening where you have our special guests, Bill Sullivan and Craig Romano, who are two very well-known guidebook authors, and we're doing a webinar with them on Sunday night. So if that is something you're interested in checking out and learning more about the Pacific Northwest hiking experience, I'd recommend checking that out as well.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much. And on that note, Susan, would you pick a number 1 through 19 for me? Oh,
You're muted.
I know.
17.
17. Okay. Nicole Harder, you're a Kula Cloth winner. So you can message the Instagram account or you can message me.
Yay! I'm so excited.
Yay! I'm excited for you, girl. It's my favorite thing to have on my backpack. Cool. Nice to see all of your faces tonight, ladies. Thanks for joining us and have a wonderful evening. Oh, and did anybody have questions? I guess I should have thrown that out there. Everybody was saying thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to stick around if anyone has questions.
Yeah,
Me too.
I meant to throw that out there and I got too excited.
All good.
Cool. But this was awesome. I'm super excited to partner with you guys. So thanks so much for putting this on. And yeah, I would love to have you guys again. I think this was super cool and informative. So.
Yeah, we're excited to have some of you come out on trail with us. It's fun to learn about it in this format, but it's even more fun to get a tool in your hand and get your hands dirty. So hopefully we'll see y'all out on the trail sometime.
I actually would like a rainy day. That muddy part, get muddy. I was out today and I was like, I got soaked. I was like, well, you might as well. That's just where we're at. Might as well learn to love it. So.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Well, if you're working when it's wet, you stay warm. So
that's right. Yeah, it doesn't even matter. So. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much for everybody for joining us. And yeah, what an informative, awesome evening. So thanks you guys so much.
Great. Take care.
My pleasure.